My name is Daniel Park, and I'm 28 years old. 6 months ago, my uncle and cousins threw me out of our family business for crying at my father's memorial board meeting. Today, they're outside my apartment building at 3 a.m., begging me to save the company they stole from me. But to understand how we got here, I need to go back to the beginning. Park Electronics was founded by my grandfather in 1978. Starting in a small warehouse in Los Angeles, he built it into a major electronics distributor through relationships, not just contracts, but genuine friendships with suppliers across Asia. My father, the eldest son, was supposed to inherit the business, but he had different dreams. He became a teacher instead, leaving the company to his younger brother, my Uncle Richard. This created a rift that never fully healed. Uncle Richard saw Dad's choice as weakness, a betrayal of the family legacy. He took over the company with an iron fist, preaching that business was war and only the strong survived. I grew up caught between two worlds. At home, Dad taught me about empathy, literature, and the importance of human connection. Strength isn't about being hard, Daniel, he'd say. It's about being kind when the world gives you every reason not to be. But summers were spent at Park Electronics, where Uncle Richard tried to toughen me up. He'd make me work the warehouse floor, berating me for any sign of softness. His twin sons, Marcus and Tony, followed his lead, treating me like the weak cousin who didn't belong. "Your dad made you soft," Marcus would sneer. This is why he couldn't handle real business. Everything changed when I was 22, fresh out of college with a degree in international business and fluent in Korean, Mandarin, and Japanese thanks to Dad's insistence on languages. I joined Park Electronics full-time. Uncle Richard wasn't happy about it, but the board, still partially made up of my grandfather's old friends, insisted that family should have opportunity. He stuck me in procurement, thinking it would bore me into quitting. Instead, I thrived. While Marcus and Tony focused on squeezing every penny from suppliers and treating them like enemies, I took a different approach. I learned about their businesses, their families, their challenges. I helped solve problems beyond just negotiating prices. Mr. Chen from Shenzhen Circuits had a daughter studying in LA. I helped her find housing near USC. Mrs. Yamamoto from Tokyo Components was struggling with FDA regulations for a medical device sideline. I connected her with a consultant friend. Mr. Kim from Seoul Semiconductor had cash flow issues. I restructured our payment terms to help him without costing us money. "You're too soft on them," Tony complained. "They're taking advantage of you." But the numbers told a different story. Within 2 years, my supplier relationships had reduced costs by 15% through voluntary discounts, improved delivery times by 30%, and most importantly, given us exclusive access to new products before our competitors. The key was a strategy one never shared with Uncle Richard. Each major contract included a personal service clause, not with Park Electronics, but with me individually as their liaison. It seemed like standard language about maintaining relationships, but it was much more. If I left the company, suppliers could choose to void their contracts within 90 days. Dad was proud of my success but worried. "Your uncle won't like being shown up," he warned. "Be careful." He was right. As my department flourished, Uncle Richard grew colder. He started excluding me from strategic meetings, criticizing every decision, demanding impossible metrics. Marcus and Tony ramped up their harassment, now with their father's full support. Then Dad got sick. Lung cancer, aggressive and untreatable. The man who'd never smoked a day in his life was dying at 58. I took family leave to care for him, spending 3 months by his side. We talked about everything: life, death, the meaning of success. "I have no regrets about leaving the business," he told me near the end. "I got to teach thousands of students, to make a real difference. Your uncle has money, but what else? What has he built besides walls?" When Dad died, I was destroyed. He wasn't just my father, he was my best friend, my moral compass, my example of how to live with integrity. The funeral was packed with former students, fellow teachers, community members whose lives he'd touched. Uncle Richard gave a perfunctory speech about family duty and left early. The board meeting was scheduled for the day after the funeral. I tried to postpone, still raw with grief, but Uncle Richard insisted. "Business doesn't stop for death," he said. I walked into that boardroom wearing the same suit from the funeral, running on no sleep, held together by coffee and obligation. The meeting started with financial reports, strategic planning, the usual corporate theater. Then Uncle Richard stood up. "We need to discuss restructuring," he announced. "The procurement department has become too bloated, too sentimental. It's time for new leadership." I knew what was coming but was too exhausted to fight, as he outlined plans to replace me with Marcus, to professionalize our supplier relationships. Something in me broke. I thought about Dad, about how he'd never get to see me fight for what I'd built, about all the words left unsaid. The tears came without warning, silent at first, then harder to control. In that boardroom full of suits and spreadsheets, I cried for my father. The room went silent, then Uncle Richard spoke, his voice dripping with disgust. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Real men don't cry at board meetings. This emotional weakness has no place in business. Marcus laughed. Seriously? Crying? What are you, 5? Tony joined in. This is embarrassing. Get it together. I looked around the room. Some board members looked uncomfortable, but none spoke up. Uncle Richard continued his presentation as if I wasn't there, outlining how Marcus would take over my role, how they'd optimize supplier relationships for maximum profit. Furthermore, he added, Daniel's equity position will be restructured. His 15% stake will be diluted to 2% to reflect his actual contribution to this company. That's illegal, I managed to say through the grief. You can't just take my shares. Read your contract. Uncle Richard smiled coldly. Performance-based vesting, and crying at board meetings? That's clear evidence of inability to perform duties. They had me sign papers. I was too grief-stricken to read them carefully. Security escorted me out like a criminal while my cousins high-fived in the hallway. I cleaned out my desk in a daze, taking only personal items and leaving behind 5 years of work. The next weeks were a blur of grief and humiliation. The story spread through the industry, how Daniel Park broke down crying and got fired from his own family's company. Some reached out in sympathy, but many distanced themselves. In business, weakness is contagious. I moved into a small apartment, living off savings, trying to figure out my next move. Then, 3 months after being thrown out, I got a call from Mr. Chen in Shenzhen. Daniel, I heard what happened. I'm very sorry about your father. He raised a good man. Thank you, Mr. Chen. I appreciate. I'm calling about our contract. He interrupted. The 90-day clause. Your cousins have been difficult. They treat us like servants, not partners. I think it's time to explore other options. One by one, they called. Mrs. Yamamoto, Mr. Kim, smaller suppliers I'd cultivated over the years. Each had the same story, Marcus and Tony treating them with contempt, demanding impossible terms, threatening to find cheaper alternatives. They don't understand, Mrs. Yamamoto said. Business is about relationships, not just transactions. Your grandfather knew this. You know this. They are just bullies with calculators. I made a decision. Using my savings and a loan against my diluted shares, I started my own company, Harmony Electronics. Not very creative, but it captured what I wanted to build. Within a month, I'd signed exclusive contracts with 7 major suppliers. Within 2 months, I had 15. Park Electronics didn't notice at first. They had inventory buffers, other suppliers they could squeeze. Marcus sent me gloating emails about their record profits from cutting the fat in procurement costs. Uncle Richard gave interviews about running business like a man. Then the shortages started. First, little things, specific chips that were hard to source elsewhere. Then bigger problems, entire product lines unavailable. Their secondary suppliers couldn't match the quality or price of my network. Customers started complaining about delays and defects. 6 months after that board meeting, Park Electronics was in crisis. They'd lost 3 major clients, inventory was critically low, and their stock price had dropped 40%. That's when Uncle Richard called. Daniel, he said, his voice missing its usual arrogance, we need to talk. I'm listening, I said. This supplier situation, it's a misunderstanding. We're family, surely we can work something out. We were family when you threw me out for grieving my father, I replied. What's changed? Don't be emotional about this, he snapped, the mask slipping. This is business. Exactly, I said, and my business doesn't work with companies that treat suppliers as enemies. Goodbye, Uncle. The calls escalated. Marcus threatened legal action, until lawyers explained that the contracts were ironclad. Tony tried bribing my suppliers. They sent me recordings of his offers. Laughing at the insult, board members reached out, suddenly concerned about my unfair treatment. Then came the night they showed up at my apartment, 3 a.m., Uncle Richard, Marcus, and Tony standing in the rain. Security called up, should they let them in? I met them in the lobby. They looked different, older, desperate, diminished. Uncle Richard, always so perfectly pressed, was disheveled. The twins had lost their swagger. Please, Uncle Richard said, the word seemingly foreign to his tongue. The company is dying, we're weeks from bankruptcy. I know, I said simply. You did this on purpose, Marcus accused, you planned this whole thing. No, I corrected, I built relationships while you built walls. When you threw me out, those relationships came with me. That's not revenge, that's consequence. What do you want? Tony asked. Money? Shares? An apology? I wanted a father, I said, surprising myself with the honesty. I wanted an uncle who saw strength in kindness. I wanted cousins who understood that business is about more than numbers. But that ship sailed when you laughed at me for crying over the man who taught me everything that I know. So you'll let us fail? Uncle Richard's voice cracked. Your grandfather's company? Grandfather's company died the day you turned it into a machine that crushes people, I said. What's failing now is your company, the one built on contempt and cruelty. Daniel, please. Uncle Richard dropped to his knees in the lobby. I'm begging you, we'll give you anything. Full control, majority shares, whatever you want. The security guard was recording on his phone. Tomorrow, the industry would know that Richard Park begged on his knees to the nephew he'd called weak. The irony was perfect, but I felt no satisfaction. Get up, I said quietly, this is embarrassing. He struggled to his feet, age showing in every movement. The three of them stood there, waiting for my verdict. I'll make you a deal, I said finally. I'll supply Park Electronics, but under new terms. Harmony Electronics will acquire 75% of the company for assumption of debts. You'll retain 25% but no voting rights. Marcus and Tony will be terminated immediately, and Uncle Richard, you'll retire. Full divestment within 1 year. That's theft, Marcus protested. That's business, I echoed Uncle Richard's favorite phrase. Take it or bankruptcy, you have 24 hours. They took it, of course. What choice did they have? The transition was smoother than expected. I kept most of the employees, promoting those Uncle Richard had overlooked. The company culture changed overnight, from fear to collaboration, from contempt to respect. Suppliers who'd been considering leaving renewed their contracts with enthusiasm. I made Uncle Richard stay for the announcement. Watching as I addressed the company, I spoke about my father's values, about building a business on relationships and trust. When I finished, the applause was genuine, from everyone except the three men who'd once owned it all. Marcus and Tony found work eventually, though not in the industry. Their reputations were toxic. Uncle Richard retired to Arizona, alone. His wife had left him years ago, tired of being married to a man who confused cruelty with strength. Last month was the anniversary of Dad's death. I visited his grave with good news. Park Electronics had its best quarter ever, and we'd established a foundation in his name to help underprivileged kids attend college. As I stood there, I didn't cry, not because I was trying to be strong, but because I finally understood what he'd been teaching me all along. Real strength isn't about being hard, it's about staying soft in a hard world. It's about building bridges while others build walls. It's about crying when you need to cry and not being ashamed of your humanity. Uncle Richard was wrong. Real men do cry at board meetings. They cry for fathers they've lost, for families torn apart by greed, for companies that could have been great but chose to be cruel instead. But real men also build something better from the ashes. They prove that kindness isn't weakness, that relationships matter more than transactions, that you can succeed without crushing others. My name is Daniel Park. I'm 28 years old. I cried at a board meeting, and it was the strongest thing I've ever done, because that moment of weakness revealed who truly held the power, not the men who confused cruelty with strength, but the one who understood that in business, as in life, relationships are everything. The company thrives now, built on the principles Dad taught me. Every major decision, I ask myself what he would do. The answer is always the same: choose kindness, value people, build connections. Turns out the soft kid was the strongest one all along. Uncle Richard just took $50 million worth of losses to figure it out.